In the town of Zinsunsan, beside the wide lake of Pátzcuaro, the adobe houses with their red-tiled roofs held a silence broken only by the crowing of roosters and the distant calls of bread sellers announcing their warm loaves. Dawn stretched across the sky like a pale blanket, and the smoke of cooking fires drifted slowly above the courtyards. It was a morning like many others, but for the Morales family, it would be remembered forever. Tomas, a boy of 6 years, awoke before the first beams of light touched the window. His eyes were wide open, his breath fast, as if he had been running for hours, though his body had been lying still under the wool blanket. He stood up with uncertain steps, his bare feet pressing against the cool floor, and went to the kitchen where his mother was already shaping tortillas from fresh masa. "Mama," he said, with a voice that trembled and yet carried a strange firmness. "Last night I was with Jesus. I saw him. He spoke to me, and he was here in these lands." The woman froze. The ball of dough slipped from her fingers onto the wooden table, leaving a white smear of cornmeal. She looked at her son, and a chill ran down her back. Tomas did not pause. His words came as if he were repeating something already written inside him. "He took me to a place with high mountains and showed me a path made of white stones that shone even though the sun was not there. He said he had come long ago to visit the people here, the people of this soil, before anyone from across the sea arrived." The mother's hands shook. She made the sign of the cross on her chest and whispered a prayer. She had heard old stories from her grandparents, tales of strange visitors with beards and shining garments who had come centuries before the conquest, but those were always dismissed as myths, fragments of forgotten songs. Tomas looked older than his 6 years. His dark eyes seemed to carry a weight too heavy for a child. He continued, "He told me that in these hills there are stones with his words, and that someday people will find them. He said the time is coming when they will be read again." At that moment, his uncle Esteban entered. Esteban was a seminarian, tall and thin, with a face marked by both devotion and doubt. He had left the seminary the week before, troubled by questions he could not silence. He heard the boy's words and stopped short, the clay pitcher of water trembling in his hands. "What did you say?" Niño Esteban asked, his voice breaking. Tomas repeated everything, almost word for word, as if he had memorized it in his dreams. The seminarian's heart raced. He knew enough of theology to understand how dangerous such claims could be. Yet he also recalled fragments of manuscripts he had once seen in the cathedral archives, vague notes from friars who had hinted at strange encounters in the New World, encounters they dared not publish openly. The boy, unaware of the weight his words carried, reached for a piece of bread and ate calmly, as though he had simply shared news of a neighbor's visit. But the kitchen felt different now. The air itself was thick with a presence, and every sound seemed amplified: the crackle of the fire, the slow turning of the metate stone, the soft breathing of the mother. Esteban sat beside the boy, trying to catch every syllable. Tomas did. "He say where these stones are?" The child nodded. "Near the lake where the reeds grow tall, there is a mound. He told me that under the earth there are tablets written with marks that are not like ours. He said they will speak of his coming." The seminarian's blood turned cold. He remembered a story once whispered by an old Tarascan elder in his parish about a sacred mound guarded by spirits where no one dared to dig. Could it be the same place the mother, overwhelmed, wanted to hush her son, to forbid such words? But something in his gaze stopped her. It was not the gaze of a mischievous child inventing a tale. It was calm, luminous, and ancient, as if through those eyes someone else was looking at them. Outside, the day had fully broken. The cries of fishermen echoed from the lake, and the bells of the convent rang for morning prayer. Yet in that small kitchen time seemed suspended. The story of a 6-year-old had suddenly opened a door that no one in the Morales family knew how to close. That same afternoon, Esteban could not rest. The words of his nephew repeated in his mind like a psalm recited endlessly. He walked through the narrow streets of Tzintzuntzan, past the old Franciscan monastery, whose stone walls were worn smooth by centuries of wind. The arches stood silent, the carvings of saints half erased by time, and yet in his imagination the place seemed alive with whispers. The seminarian had abandoned the seminary not out of rebellion, but because the questions of history, faith, and memory gnawed at him like moths devouring cloth. He had studied Augustine Aquinas' The Councils, but he had also leafed through fragile colonial manuscripts, where friars had confessed sometimes with trembling ink that they suspected Christ had revealed himself far earlier, far beyond the Mediterranean world. Such suspicions had always been silenced by their superiors. When Tomás spoke of Jesus walking among the mountains, Esteban remembered one particular note he had read written by a Franciscan in 1548. It spoke of a child among the Purépecha who recites the Beatitudes without ever being taught them. The page had been tucked away with no explanation, like a dangerous ember hidden in dry straw. That night, Esteban returned to the Morales home. The fire in the hearth burned low, filling the air with the smell of pine resin. The boy sat near the window, his small hands tracing invisible patterns on the glass, as if drawing symbols no one else could see. Tomás Esteban whispered, kneeling so their eyes met. "Tell me again about the path of white stones. Were there others there with him?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. There were men and women. Their clothes were simple, made of woven fibers. They sang in a tongue I didn't understand, but he did. He spoke with them, and they listened like children. The words sent shivers across Esteban's arms. He thought of the codices he had glimpsed in the archive, bright colors on amate paper, showing tall figures with radiant halos received by local people under the open sky. Scholars dismissed them as depictions of Quetzalcoatl or other deities. But what if those painters had seen something different? The mother interrupted, setting down a clay mug of atole. "Brother," she said firmly, "you must not encourage him. He is only a child. People will laugh, or worse, they will condemn him." But Esteban shook his head. This is not invention. His words echo things long hidden. He turned back to Tomás. Did he say anything else? The boy's eyes grew distant, as though he were looking through the walls. He said that his presence was not only across the sea, that he walked here too, that these lands are part of his fold. He said the shepherd never leaves any sheep behind. The room fell silent. Even the crackling of the fire seemed to bow before the words. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the town. A neighbor overheard Tomás speaking in a strange language, by the well syllables rolling like an ancient chant. An old woman swore she recognized some of the sounds from songs her grandfather had sung in Purépecha, though mixed with something older still. Children began to follow Tomás when he walked, waiting for him to speak, to tell them what he had seen. One morning, Esteban took the boy to the lake's edge. The reeds rustled, and the fishermen prepared their nets. Tomás pointed toward a mound of earth half hidden by brush. There, he said simply, "Beneath the stones, sleep." Esteban's knees weakened. He had indeed heard of that mound. Some elders whispered that it was a forbidden place, that strange lights had been seen over it on moonless nights. The Spanish friars had avoided it, leaving it untouched. He felt torn between fear and awe. To unearth anything from such a site would cause uproar. The church would likely deny it. Scholars would debate endlessly, and yet his heart burned to see if it was true. That evening he sought out Don Alonso, an elderly teacher who had once studied anthropology in Morelia. The old man, stooped and nearly blind, listened to Esteban's recounting with trembling lips. "My father spoke of such things," Alonso said slowly. "He said there were stones carved long before the conquest, showing a man in white garments with hair like light standing beside our people. They said he came from across the waters, but not from Spain. I thought it was only legend. If the boy truly saw him, perhaps the legends were memory, not invention." Esteban's chest tightened. He felt as if a curtain was being lifted piece by piece. Yet with every new detail came danger. If the story reached the ears of the bishop in Morelia, they might brand Tomas as possessed or accuse the family of blasphemy. That night, the boy dreamed again. He awoke and told his uncle. He said not to be afraid. He said truth is not afraid of time. The words lingered in Esteban's mind like fireflies, impossible to catch, impossible to ignore. That week, the town felt as if it were holding its breath. Women hushed their conversations when Tomas passed. Men at the plaza stopped mid-sentence, their hats paused halfway to their brows. Esteban went from house to house with a quiet urgency, seeking counsel without giving away too much. In the end, he wrote a careful letter to a former professor in Morelia, a man named Dr. Rodrigo Castaneda, who had spent 40 years studying the region's pre-Hispanic past. Esteban did not mention visions, nor did he write the holy name. He spoke instead of a mound near reeds of persistent oral stories of symbols that might rest under earth, older than any parish registry. 3 days later, a dusty pickup arrived at dawn. The man who climbed down from the passenger side was thin, gray-haired, with hands stained by soil and ink. His eyes were skeptical, but kind. He greeted the mother with a bow. He greeted Tomas, as one greets a child one does not yet understand, and he led Esteban to the edge of the lake without wasting words. They stood before the mound the boy had pointed out. It was not large, no towering pyramid, just a gentle swelling in the earth, tufted with grass and ringed by reeds whispering in the breeze. Dr. Castaneda circled it, stooped pressed fingertips to soil as if listening. If there is anything, he murmured, the water might have protected it, or swallowed it. He turned to Tomas. "Muchacho, where would you begin?" Tomas knelt and placed his palm on the ground. He closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing moved. The lake breathed softly against its banks. Then the boy lifted his hand and tapped a spot just off center. "Here," he said. "But you must make a small doorway, not a wide wound." He doesn't like wounds. The archaeologist glanced at Esteban, hiding a smile he could not explain. "A trench will do," he said gently. "We won't wound." With shovels and care, they cut a neat, narrow trench. The smell of damp earth rose sweet and cold. In the third hour, the shovel of a young helper struck something that sounded like a muted bell. Everyone froze. Esteban brushed away soil with his fingers, heartbeat drumming in his ears. Beneath the loam lay a flat stone, dark with age, its surface veiled in a film of clay. Castaneda knelt and with a soft brush coaxed the stone awake. Lines emerged. No, Not lines, scratches arranged with intention, shallow grooves that ran in tight ranks across the face. Along one edge there were marks that curved and knotted like vines. Along the other, strokes straight as reeds. The archaeologist drew in a long breath. "These are not Purepecha glyphs," he said softly. "Nor are they Latin letters. Two systems side by side." He looked at Tomas. "What do you see?" The boy did not answer at once. He extended a small hand and stopped it a hair's breadth above the stone, as if afraid to touch skin still raw. "They are two songs," he whispered, "one in the tongue of the shepherd's house and one in the tongue of the lake." Esteban felt something shift inside his chest. "Can you read them?" Tomas's brows knit in concentration. He sounded out syllables that did not belong to any catechism taught in Tzintzuntzan, syllables round and harsh by turns, with breaths like tiny flames between them. The room of open sky and reeds became a chapel. Even the flies fell quiet. "What does it say?" Esteban's voice had become a thread. The child's gaze went far away, and when he spoke, it was almost a recitation. Bartolo, who walked with Yeshua, marked these words for the children of the West Water. "I write as a witness that the light spoke on these shores, so that when darkness comes from the east, they will remember that the dawn had already arrived." No one moved. Dr. Castaneda rose unsteadily, as if the earth had tipped. He rubbed his eyes, trying to force them back into the world of stones and dates. "It could be a fraud," he muttered, though no one had accused it. Fraud was a raft he needed beneath his feet. "It could be later. It could be colonial. It could be—" Tomas touched the other set of marks, the ones that curved. He murmured a second passage this time, with rhythms closer to the lake, to the words sung in markets, and at wakes, though older, heavier, full of earth. Esteban caught fragments he recognized from Purepecha, prayers, seeds, breath, dawn, woven with something that made the hairs lift along his arms. Castaneda set his jaw. "We will not remove it," he said. "Not yet. Photograph, document, then protect. We must be methodical." He turned to Esteban, to the mother. "I will bring colleagues, linguists, a conservator, a geochemist. And we tell no one else for now. But secrets are like scents. They travel even through shut doors." By evening the plaza hummed. Some said a pagan altar had been found. Others whispered of a saint's lost stone. A catechist came to the Morales door with questions disguised as blessings. A curious shopkeeper passed by twice thrice, whistling off key. The mother shut the windows as if shutters could hold back rumor. Tomas sat quietly with a clay whistle between his fingers, spinning it without blowing. When Esteban entered, the boy lifted his head. "He says we must be gentle," Tomas whispered. "He says the words were buried to keep them safe, not to make anyone fight." That night, in the low flicker of the kitchen light, Esteban confessed his fear to the archaeologist. "If this is what it seems, it will unmoor people. My superiors will deny it, others will worship it, and the boy." His voice broke. "He is 6. Castaneda did not answer immediately. He stared at his hands, old maps of river and bone. "I have spent a lifetime trying to peel truth from story, without tearing either," he said at last. "Perhaps for once story is the skin truth chose." 2 mornings later, the professor returned with a small team. They carried cases of instruments, like musicians, arriving for a solemn concert. The conservator hummed as she worked a habit when her hands were most precise. The linguist, a woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice, crouched beside Tomas and asked whether the sounds he spoke came to him as words or as music. As footprints, he replied after thinking, I only step where they are. They measured, photographed, shielded the stone from light. A thin sample no larger than a bean was taken from the soil clinging to its side to test for age. The process was clinical, even tender. And yet at noon, the town's priest arrived. He did not enter like a storm. He entered like rain that had made up its mind to fall. "Esteban," he said, "may we speak?" In the shade of the jacaranda, the priest, Father Ignacio, whose hair had gone white, hearing confessions that never left his heart, searched his former seminarian's face for a lie and found none. "I have heard enough," he said softly. "I do not come to stop you. I come to ask for prudence. If this is false, it will harm faith. If it is true, it will harm pride. Both can wound." Esteban swallowed the knot in his throat. "We are trying to be careful." Father Ignacio's eyes softened when Tomas approached the clay whistle in his hand. "Hijo," the priest said, kneeling to his height, "does he say anything for me?" Tomas tilted his head, listening to a voice only he could hear. "He says not to hurry forgiveness," the boy murmured, "and not to delay it either." The priest closed his eyes. He nodded once as if receiving a sacrament unseen. At sunset, the lake burned copper. Dr. Castaneda stood alone by the mound hands and pockets, the day's dust on his shoes. Esteban came to stand beside him. No words for a while. Crickets began their liturgy. "What if the stone is not the only thing?" the archaeologist said at last, barely above a whisper. "What if the stone is a door?" Tomas tugged at Esteban's sleeve. "He says there is a place where the water goes to sleep," the boy said, pointing toward a narrow channel veiled by reeds. "There is a mouth there, but it only opens when the moon is new. Inside are skins that carry paint and stories. Skins," the linguist echoed from behind them. "Like deer," Tomas answered, "but thin and folded like quiet wings." The conservator's breath caught. "Codices," she whispered, and pressed her lips tight to keep the word from flying too far. They checked the calendar. The new moon would lift its invisible face in 2 nights. The team prepared what they could prepare. The rest they entrusted to the patience of dark water and the stubbornness of truth. In the Morales home, the mother folded her son's clothes, laid out a sweater against the chill, boiled a broth thick with garlic and episode. She wanted to ask the heavens to leave them alone, and wanted, too, not to be left out of whatever the heavens were beginning. That night, Tomas stirred from sleep and stood barefoot in the courtyard, the stones cold underfoot. He looked up as if measuring the distance between stars and the roof tiles. Esteban found him there and wrapped a blanket over his shoulders. "Are you afraid?" Esteban asked. Tomas leaned into him. "A little. He says that fear is the gatekeeper of important rooms." They stayed like that a long time, listening to the lake, breathing in the dark, to the town dreaming around them, to the silence that comes before a page is turned. 2 nights later, the new moon rose invisible above the lake, and the reeds bent as if leaning to listen. Esteban, Dr. Castaneda, the linguist, and 2 assistants followed Tomas through a narrow path where the earth grew soft and the smell of wet roots clung to the air. The boy carried a lantern no bigger than his hand, its light dancing in gold threads across his cheeks. He did not speak much, only whispered once, "He says we are close." At the end of the path, the channel widened into a pool shadowed by a wall of reeds that swayed but did not break. Tomas stopped. He pointed. There, he said, "The mouth is sleeping, but tonight it will breathe." The adults looked at one another. To them it was only water thick with reeds, but the child bent to his knees, set the lantern down, and touched the surface. A ripple spread, gentle yet deliberate, and the reeds parted slightly, revealing an opening no wider than a door. The assistants gasped. Castaneda muttered a prayer not meant for anyone's ears. They secured a rope and stepped into the shallow water. Esteban went first with Tomas perched against his chest, the lantern held high. The reeds closed behind them, muffling the world outside, until only the sound of dripping water and the faint tremor of their own breath remained. The channel sloped downward, forming a narrow cave whose ceiling pressed low. The walls glistened, streaked with mineral veins, like frozen lightning. After several minutes, the space widened into a small chamber where the air was cooler and still. In the center lay a stone slab, flat and deliberate, and atop it, bundles wrapped in hide, bound with cords of twisted fiber. The smell of age was thick dust resin, time itself. The linguist fell to her knees, not in worship, but in awe. Codices, she whispered the word, trembling like a leaf in wind. They worked carefully, brushing off centuries of soil, loosening knots with reverence. Within the hides were folded sheets of deerskin painted with pigments still alive, with color reds like coals, blues like lapis yellows, like dry marigold. Scenes unrolled before their eyes, figures with beards and flowing tunics, walking beside men and women dressed in maize headdresses. Rivers and mountains familiar as those outside the cave. Circles of fire drawn above gatherings of villagers. Tomas pointed to one page where a man taller than the rest stood with a staff shaped like a cross. His eyes were painted as twin suns, and in his other hand he held an ear of corn. Around him the people knelt, not in fear, but in a gesture of welcome. "He came here," Tomas said softly. "They called him the Master of Dawn. He told them he was the Son of Light." Esteban's heart raced. He wanted to deny what he saw, to protect himself from the storm these images would unleash, yet the colors glared at him with undeniable clarity. Dr. Castaneda's hands shook as he sketched hurried notes. "Impossible," he whispered. "If this is genuine, it predates the conquest." This would mean his voice failed him. The linguist leaned closer, tracing the painted glyphs with her eyes. "The language here," she murmured, "is older than Purepecha, closer to the coastal tongues. Yet some signs are not native, they echo Mediterranean forms. How could they have crossed?" Tomas interrupted her thoughts with a child's certainty. "He walked. He didn't cross the sea like men do. The sea obeyed him." The words chilled Esteban, yet they carried a strange peace. The boy's voice was neither proud nor fearful, simply truthful in the way children tell the color of the sky. They wrapped the codices again, too fragile to carry, and promised to return with materials for preservation. As they prepared to leave, Tomas lingered, his small hand resting on the stone slab. He whispered something no one else caught, and for an instant the chamber seemed to brighten, as if a hidden torch had flared, then vanished. Outside, the night was heavy with silence. The town lay unaware, sleeping under its patchwork of clay roofs. The team returned in secrecy mud, clinging to their clothes, eyes restless with what they had witnessed. Esteban lay awake until dawn, unable to still his thoughts. He prayed, though, not as he had been taught, but in words closer to cries for understanding than for absolution. By the following afternoon, rumors had already leaked further. Children playing near the lake claimed to have seen lights among the reeds. A fisherman swore he heard chanting. The parish priest counseled calm from the pulpit, though his trembling hands betrayed him. Dr. Castaneda locked himself in the small municipal library, comparing his notes with old colonial chronicles. He found faint references in friar accounts, whispers of a pale prophet who had visited villages near the lake centuries before the Spaniards came teaching with parables of seed and harvest. The friars had dismissed them as pagan distortions, yet here painted on skin was the echo of the same tale. When the archaeologist emerged, Esteban saw his eyes were red from sleeplessness. "We are standing at the edge of fire," he confessed. "This will attract believers, deniers, authorities, opportunists. If we move too quickly, everything will be lost or destroyed." Tomas, sitting nearby with his clay whistle, looked up and said simply, "He says you must guard the truth with silence until the right bell rings." No one understood what bell he meant, but they all felt the weight of it. That evening, as dusk painted the lake in amber and violet, Esteban found himself walking alone through the abandoned Franciscan monastery at the edge of Tzintzuntzan. Its arches were cracked, its courtyard overgrown with weeds, yet the stones still breathed of chants long gone. He sat on the cold step and wondered had the faith he had studied all his life already known of this visit, but chosen silence, or had history itself been stitched with missing threads now pressing through the seam. The night wind brought him the echo of Tomas's words. He says the words were buried to keep them safe, not to make anyone fight. Esteban closed his eyes and felt a choice looming over him, larger than his own life, heavier than the walls that surrounded him. And in that moment, though no one else was there, he thought he heard a bell tolling faintly across the water. Not the bell of San Salvador, nor of any church nearby, but a deeper note that seemed to rise from the lake itself. The days that followed were uneasy, like the hush before a storm. In Tzintzuntzan, people spoke in lowered voices, not out of fear of men, but out of awe at something larger than themselves. The fishermen along the lake rowed with slower strokes, as though wary of disturbing secrets under the water. Women lighting candles in the church seemed more solemn whispering prayers that mingled the names of Christ with older invocations remembered from their grandmothers. Esteban moved through the town with the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Each morning he felt the familiar pull of the church of the doctrine that had given him discipline and belonging. But each night he replayed the images of the codices in his mind, the bearded figure, the staff in the shape of a cross, the faces of villagers painted in colors more alive than memory. And he heard Tomas's voice calm and unshaken. He came here. Dr. Castaneda, meanwhile, wrestled with the duties of his profession. He spent long hours writing sketching and comparing fragments. He even sent a discreet letter to a trusted colleague in Morelia, phrasing his words carefully, avoiding the names of the child or the town. "I may have encountered iconography that suggests a pre-Columbian anticipation of Christian motifs," he wrote. "It is urgent but delicate. Confirmations must be sought quietly." He sealed the letter with wax, his hand trembling. The linguist, Maria Solis, was more daring. She visited households at night, asking elders about the old stories. In the smoke of kitchens, she heard fragments that made her heart pound. One old woman recalled her grandfather telling of a traveler clothed in light who had blessed the maize fields and vanished into the hills. Another whispered of a song never written that spoke of a friend of dawn who taught forgiveness before the strangers with iron arrived. Each voice was like a loose thread pulling toward the same pattern, though frayed by centuries of silence. Tomas remained unchanged. He still played with his clay whistle, still laughed at the puppies in the street, still asked for sweet bread after Mass. Yet at moments he spoke sentences that silenced the room. One afternoon, while Esteban was fixing a broken chair, Tomas said suddenly, "He left footprints that will not dry, but you need the eyes of water to see them." When asked what he meant, he only shrugged and hummed a tune older than his years. The parish priest, Father Ignacio, grew increasingly uneasy. He had tolerated Esteban's presence and the scholar's discreet activity, but whispers had reached him that outsiders were asking questions in Pátzcuaro. One evening after Vespers, he confronted Esteban in the sacristy. "What are you doing with that boy?" he demanded, his voice rising above the clatter of extinguished candles. "These tales threaten to undo the faith of the simple. Do you not see the danger? The Inquisition may be gone, but the Church still defends its flock." Esteban bowed his head, torn between obedience and honesty. "Father, the boy speaks with a truth not taught by men. We have seen things, signs left in stone and skin. To deny them feels like closing one's eyes at noon." Father Ignacio slammed the missal shut. "You are playing with fire. Perhaps the devil himself paints these visions to test us. I warn you, Esteban, if you persist, you may find yourself cast out, not only from the church, but from your people." That night, Esteban wandered the streets, restless, hearing in his mind the echo of both warnings and promises. He stopped at the lake's edge where the water lapped softly. Across the dark surface, torches flickered from fishermen's canoes. He knelt and whispered, "Lord, if you walked here once, walk with me now, for I do not know where else to turn." The following dawn, Tomas came to him carrying a small stone. It was by the water, he said. Etched upon it was a mark that seemed accidental at first, but as Esteban turned it in his palm, he realized it was deliberate, a cross faint, but unmistakable, carved with an unsteady hand centuries ago. Esteban's breath caught. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Tomas pointed to the lake. The waves gave it back. The discovery spread quickly among the circle of scholars. Dr. Castaneda compared the cross to early missionary carvings, but its style was too crude, too old. Maria suggested it might be part of a larger set of stones hidden beneath the waters. Tomas, however, insisted he left many so that when the world was ready, they would rise. By then, the town was no longer calm. Word had reached curious ears in Morelia. A government cultural official arrived unannounced, demanding to see the artifacts. Esteban Maria and Castaneda refused, claiming only to have found damaged fragments. The official left suspicious but unconvinced, promising to return. Fear crept among them, fear not of discovery alone, but of misuse. What would happen if these codices were paraded for politics, or dismissed as forgeries, or locked away in a vault, never to be seen again? That evening, Tomas gathered them under the courtyard fig tree. His eyes were unusually bright. "He says the bell is closer," he told them. "When it rings, the truth must be carried not hidden, but it must be carried gently like fire in dry grass. Too fast, and it burns everything." The group sat in silence, the rustling leaves above them like the murmur of invisible witnesses. Esteban felt a resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, condemnation, exile, or revelation, he would not abandon the boy or the truth he bore. As night deepened, the bells of San Salvador tolled for evening prayer. Their familiar notes echoed across the lake. Yet in Esteban's heart, he heard another bell, deeper, older, rising from the earth itself, calling him toward a destiny he could not yet name. La mañana en que la campana sonó sola sin manos. En su cuerda, un silencio extraño cayó sobre Tzintzuntzan. La niebla del lago cubría los muros franciscanos, se colaba en los callejones, envolvía los huertos y las trojes como si la historia misma estuviera conteniendo la respiración. Los pobladores se miraban entre sí con desconfianza, pues todos sabían que la campana del convento viejo estaba dañada desde hacía décadas, su badajo apenas colgando, incapaz de vibrar por sí mismo. Y sin embargo, aquel amanecer había repicado lento 3 veces como señal de algún anuncio antiguo. Esteban fue el primero en correr hacia el atrio. Encontró a Tomás sentado sobre las piedras gastadas con los pies descalzos y los ojos fijos en el cielo gris. No parecía sorprendido, solo atento, como quien escucha palabras inaudibles para los demás. Cuando su tío se inclinó, el niño susurró. Dijo que era hora de mostrar lo que duerme bajo las aguas. La campana llamó a los guardianes. El eco de esa frase atravesó al exseminarista. Recordó las advertencias de don Alonso sobre los mitos del lago, sobre los códices que, según decían, habían sido escondidos en cuevas sumergidas cuando llegaron los conquistadores. Esteban miró a su alrededor. Varios hombres se habían reunido, algunos con sombreros en mano, mujeres con rebozos hasta los ojos, todos murmurando, entre dientes, oraciones que mezclaban el Padre Nuestro con invocaciones purépechas. El padre Ignacio apareció poco después, rígido, con gesto severo, preguntando quién había tocado la campana. Nadie respondió. Solo se escuchó la voz de Tomás, clara y firme. No fue un hombre, fue la voz que vino a recordarnos. Ese mismo día, al atardecer, Esteban y los estudiosos, que aún permanecían en el pueblo, se reunieron en la casa de doña Lucía, madre del niño. Doctor Castañeda, con los ojos hundidos de tantas noches sin dormir, desplegó sobre la mesa sus apuntes. Había descubierto que los signos del monolito hallado junto al lago coincidían parcialmente con glifos encontrados en códices de Oaxaca y al mismo tiempo con inscripciones semíticas conservadas en museos europeos. Era un rompecabezas imposible, pero ahí estaba delante de ellos. No podemos divulgar esto, todavía, advirtió, ni los académicos lo creerán, ni la Iglesia lo tolerará. Mientras hablaban, Tomás se levantó y señaló el muro de adobe. Allí, dijo, detrás de la pared, se esconde otra entrada. Todos lo miraron incrédulos. Esteban golpeó suavemente la pared, y para sorpresa de todos el sonido hueco reveló un pasadizo antiguo, tapiado con piedras y lodo. Con lámparas de aceite, lo abrieron poco a poco, hasta descubrir un túnel estrecho que descendía hacia el subsuelo húmedo. El aire olía a tierra mojada y a copal. Avanzaron con cautela. El túnel conducía hacia una bóveda tallada en la roca, donde descansaban restos de maderas corroídas, fragmentos de cerámica, y en un nicho protegido, un envoltorio de fibras vegetales. Con manos temblorosas, María Solís, la lingüista, lo desenrolló. Dentro había hojas de amate cubiertas de pigmentos aún brillantes, imágenes de un hombre barbado rodeado de pueblos en danzas y ofrendas. En los márgenes aparecían caracteres dobles, unos de clara raíz indígena, otros con trazos rectilíneos semejantes a escrituras de Oriente. El corazón de Esteban latía con fuerza. ¿Y si esto es lo que Tomás vio en sus sueños? ¿Y si aquí está la prueba de que Jesús o alguien semejante caminó por estas tierras? La pregunta flotó en el aire como una chispa peligrosa. De pronto, Tomás habló con una serenidad que hizo temblar a todos. Él vino, y no vino solo. Sembró palabras en dos lenguas para que se unieran como ríos. Pero los hombres no estaban listos. Ahora deben decidir si escuchan o vuelven a enterrar la voz. La noticia del hallazgo, aunque mantenida en secreto, comenzó a filtrarse en el pueblo. Algunos decían que el niño era un santo, otros que era un engaño del demonio. Hubo discusiones en la plaza, familias divididas, rumores de que autoridades de Morelia ya habían sido informadas. Una noche, un grupo de hombres golpeó la puerta de doña Lucía, exigiendo ver al niño. Esteban y los investigadores apenas lograron contener la situación, prometiendo que al día siguiente explicarían todo. Pero al amanecer, Tomás ya no estaba en la casa. Había desaparecido como si se hubiera desvanecido en la niebla. Lo buscaron por huertos, veredas y orillas del lago sin rastro alguno. Fue entonces cuando de manera inexplicable la campana volvió a sonar sola, esta vez, una sola vez, larga y grave, como un adiós. Esteban se arrodilló en el atrio vacío y lloró en silencio. Doctor Castañeda se quedó de pie, con el códice en brazos, mirando hacia el lago cubierto de neblina. María Solís murmuró que aquello era más grande que todos ellos, que no les pertenecía. El padre Ignacio, con rostro pálido, rezaba sin cesar, dividido entre el miedo y el fervor. Y en la memoria de cada uno quedó la voz del niño repitiendo como eco eterno: la verdad no teme al tiempo. Pasaron los días y el pueblo parecía caminar sobre brasas invisibles. Algunos vecinos juraban haber visto al niño Tomás en la neblina del lago, caminando descalzo sobre las piedras mojadas, saludando con una calma imposible. Otros aseguraban haber escuchado su risa detrás de las bardas de adobe, aunque al asomarse no había nadie. Las mujeres viejas decían que era como los ángeles del agua, de las antiguas historias, mensajeros que solo aparecían cuando algo muy grande estaba por suceder. Esteban, agotado, ya no distinguía si los rumores eran invenciones del miedo o si en verdad el niño estaba presente en formas que escapaban a toda lógica. De noche soñaba con él. Lo veía sentado en la orilla del lago, acariciando con los dedos las ondas mientras murmuraba palabras que parecían abrir las estrellas. Cada vez que despertaba, tenía la sensación de haber recibido un mensaje, pero las frases se deshacían al contacto con el aire. El doctor Castañeda insistía en clasificar, fotografiar y comparar cada fragmento de códice. Estaba convencido de que las pinturas mostraban no solo a un hombre barbado, sino también símbolos que unían constelaciones mediterráneas con calendarios mesoamericanos. Es un mapa, repetía con los ojos encendidos, un mapa del cielo y del tiempo que coloca a este maestro del alba en medio de ambas tradiciones. María Solís lo escuchaba, pero advertía que el peligro no era solo académico. Si esto sale a la luz sin cuidado, habrá persecución. No somos los primeros en descubrir algo incómodo, pero sí podemos ser los últimos en verlo con libertad. El padre Ignacio, mientras tanto, se convirtió en guardián involuntario. Aunque su alma estaba desgarrada, seguía visitando la casa de doña Lucía para rezar frente al códice. Un día, en voz baja, admitió: «He leído crónicas antiguas que hablaban de hombres extraños venidos antes de la conquista, pero nunca creí que hubiera algo más que fábulas. Si lo que Tomás mostró es verdad, entonces nuestra fe no se rompe, solo se ensancha. Pero Roma jamás aceptará esto». El rumor creció tanto que delegados eclesiásticos llegaron desde Morelia disfrazados de peregrinos. Uno de ellos, un sacerdote joven de sotana impecable, interrogó a Esteban hasta el cansancio. Preguntó por el niño, por los códices, por los supuestos milagros. Esteban respondió con medias verdades, cuidando cada palabra. Sabía que un error podía costarles no solo el hallazgo, sino la seguridad de su familia. Al marcharse aquel hombre lo miró fijamente y dijo: «La Iglesia lo sabrá tarde o temprano, y entonces decidirá». La tensión alcanzó su punto más alto una madrugada de tormenta. El lago se agitaba como nunca, las olas golpeaban los muelles de madera y un trueno retumbó como si se partiera la montaña. En medio del estruendo, Esteban oyó una voz infantil llamarlo. Corrió hacia el atrio y allí estaba Tomás, empapado pero luminoso, con una calma que no pertenecía a este mundo. El niño levantó la mano y señaló hacia el horizonte del lago. «Ya no teman», dijo, «el mensaje está guardado. No podrán borrarlo». Al pronunciar esas palabras, un resplandor cruzó el cielo. No era un rayo, sino una especie de columna blanca que descendió y se reflejó en las aguas. Por un instante, todos los que miraban desde sus casas vieron figuras en la luz, hombres, mujeres y niños de tiempos distintos reunidos como si el pasado y el presente se hubieran fundido. Y en el centro, una silueta alta con rostro sereno que extendía los brazos en señal de acogida. Cuando la luz se disipó, Tomás ya no estaba. Solo quedaba el murmullo de la tormenta alejándose y el tañido profundo de la campana que resonó 3 veces más solitaria, marcando un cierre. Al día siguiente, el pueblo despertó con una extraña paz. Los códices fueron ocultados nuevamente en el túnel, esta vez con más cuidado, sellados por los mismos que habían presenciado su hallazgo. Doctor Castañeda y María Solís regresaron a la ciudad con copias y notas discretas, jurando no revelar nada sin consenso. El padre Ignacio pidió silencio a su feligresía, explicando que algunas verdades necesitan madurar como el maíz bajo tierra antes de ver la luz. Esteban, sin embargo, supo que su vida ya había cambiado para siempre. Caminaba cada tarde hasta el lago, se sentaba en el mismo sitio donde Tomás solía jugar y esperaba. A veces creía escuchar risas, otras veces el repique lejano de una campana invisible. En lo profundo de su corazón entendía que el niño no se había ido del todo, que su presencia había quedado sembrada en la memoria del pueblo y en el misterio de los códices. Los años siguientes traerían dudas, rumores, investigaciones, incluso amenazas. Pero para quienes estuvieron aquella noche de tormenta, no había duda. Jesús había pasado por aquellas tierras, y un niño de 6 años había sido su mensajero efímero. Y así en el murmullo del agua y en el repicar imposible de una campana rota, se mantuvo viva la certeza de que la verdad no teme al tiempo, ni a los hombres, ni al silencio impuesto.